can be found on page 19 of the New Testament in your Pew Bible. Matthew 22, verses 34 through 46. The greatest commandment. When the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest? He said to him, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. And a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. Now, while the Pharisees were gathered together, Jesus asked them this question: What do you think of the Messiah? Whose son is he? They said to him, The son of David. He said to them, How is it then that David by the Spirit calls him Lord, saying, The Lord said to my Lord, Sit at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet? If David thus calls him Lord, how can he be his son? No one was able to give him an answer, nor from that day did anyone dare to ask him any more questions. The word of God for the people of God.
Today's gospel reading was the end of the testing period for Jesus, the 4 little quizzes. It's on. Yeah, it's on. So, you're on here. I'm on here. That's something pulled out. Green light on. Nothing? Move the handle up. All right. Try now. Modern technology, the more we get, the less we know. So I was just saying that today's gospel reading was the end of that testing period for Jesus by the Pharisees, still in the temple. He's been in the temple now for 4 weeks. But sometimes in this midst of seasons of readings, something comes along that surpasses the gospel reading. And I thought All Saints, All Souls, and Day of the Dead is a little bit more important. In my opinion, we don't talk about death enough. Oftentimes, children don't hear about death until they lose a grandparent or a parent, and they don't know how to deal with it. But in other societies, death is dealt with daily or on a regular basis. Now, I could have changed the reading to deal with death, but where in the Gospels do we deal with death? But someplace we're going to talk about in about 6 months. And that's a very different and a particular kind of death that the common man does not experience. A common gravestone in the 17th and 18th century reads, "Remember me as you pass by. As you are now, so once was I. As I am now, so you must be. Prepare for death and follow me." So today, we honor those who have passed on before us, and we are celebrating the Day of the Dead, All Saints' Day, All Souls' Day, and any other name it may go by. Bob shared with me a person named Richard Feynman, who is one of the best known and most influential physicists of his generation. And Bob points out that he is often referred to by Sheldon Cooper in The Big Bang Theory. In the 1940s, he played a part in the development of the atomic bomb, And in 1986, as a key member of the Rogers Commission, he investigated the Space Shuttle Challenger's explosion and identified its cause. In 65, he and two colleagues were awarded the Nobel Prize, quote, for their fundamental work in quantum electrodynamics with deep plowing consequences for the physics of elementary particles. Sounds like a great read. He was also an incredibly likable character and made countless other advances in his field, the complexities of which I will never be able to understand. But in June of 45, his wife and high school sweetheart, Arlene, passed away after succumbing to tuberculosis. She was 25. 16 months later, in October, Richard wrote his late wife a heartbreaking love letter and sealed it in an envelope. It remained unopened until 1988, after he passed away. October 17th, 1946. Darlene, I adore you, sweetheart. I know how much you like to hear that, but I don't only write it because you like it. I write it because it makes me warm all over inside to write it to you. It is such a terribly long time since I last wrote to you. Almost 2 years, but I know you'll excuse me because you understand how I am, stubborn and realistic. And I thought there was no sense to writing. But now I know, my darling wife, that it is right to do what I have delayed in doing, and that I have done so much in the past. I want to tell you I love you. I want to love you. I always will love you. I find it hard to understand in my mind what it means to love you after you are dead. But I still want to comfort and take care of you. And I want you to love me and care for me. I want to have problems to discuss with you. I want to do little projects with you. I never thought until just now that we can do that. What should we do? We started to learn to make clothes together, or learn Chinese, or getting a movie projector. Can't I do something now? No. I'm alone without you, and you were the idea woman and general instigator of all our wild adventures. When you were sick, you worried because you could not give me something that you wanted to and thought I needed. You needn't have worried. Just as I told you then, there was no real need because I loved you in so many ways, so much. And now, it's clearly even more true. You can give me nothing now, yet I love you so that you stand in my way of loving anyone else. But I want you to stand there. You, dead, are so much better than anyone else alive. I know you will assure me that I am foolish and that you will want me to have full happiness and don't want me to be in my way. I'll bet you are surprised that I don't even have a girlfriend, except you, sweetheart. 2 years. But you can't help it, darling, nor can I. I don't understand it. For I've met many girls, and very nice ones, and I don't want to remain alone. But in 2 or 3 meetings, they all seem ashes. You only are left to me. You are real. My darling wife, I do adore you. I love my wife. My wife is dead. Rich. P.S. Please excuse me if not mailing this, but I don't know your new address. Quote, first I need to tell you that Dr. Feynman was an atheist. For him, there was no supernatural world for him to access his wife. But his love for a deceased wife continued. Almost every human being has experienced the continued bond of love or friendship after someone has passed. We all find ourselves there sometime in love, grief of love, loss, and closeness, giving away to physical absence. In almost every culture, there is a belief that the dead should be honored, be it out of respect or fear of ghostly retribution. In some cultures, there are holidays set aside specifically to commemorate the dead, which vary from reserved veneration to a killer party. The Inuit people believe their ancestors would visit them and appear as the Northern Lights. The Lakota people hold the tradition that the dead one's spirit lingers for a year after passing, and a special place is set up for the spirit, who is fed every day. Members of the family can come and visit, eat, and sit with the spirit and family. And after a year, the spirit is released. The Japanese celebrate the Obon festival. The Japanese believe on the interconnection and interdependence of almost everything on earth, from humans to nature to the elements, spirits. They give honor and express gratitude not only to their immediate relatives who have passed, but also to their earliest human ancestors who lived decades, centuries, and millennia ago. They believe that at the start of Obon, the spirits of their relatives and ancestors come back to the physical world and visit them. And aside from offering prayers and holding memorial services at Buddhist temples, individual houses and establishments hang lanterns, believing that the light will guide the spirits. And on the last night of Obon, people send off their spirits back to their world with the help of a floating or paper lanterns. You may have seen pictures of the many boats with candles floating down the river. So this week we are about to celebrate, although some celebrations have already occurred, All Hallows Eve, All Souls Day, All Saints Day, Obon in Japan, Chuseok in Korea, Gajatra in Nepal, King Ming in China, Pitru Paksha in Hindu tradition, just to name a few. Festivals that honor the dead. Our God is the God of the living. From long before Christianity to traditions all around the world, there is an inherent knowledge that there is life beyond this plane of existence. There is a promise of something more, and not just something more, but a place where we are united with those who have gone before us. A communion of saints, if you will. The way people view the afterlife has evolved over time. Quote, our afterlife conceptions and theologies have been impacted by our modern cosmology, the story of the universe. Traditionally, the address, referring to our opening letter, was understood as God's place as heaven, purgatory, and then hell. It was this world, earth, that is transitory, illusory, sinful, and fragmented. The next world is real, eternal, and whole. Heaven was envisioned in the sky with clouds, and that was where Jesus ascended to be with God. Hell was imagined as a place of fire underground. Heaven, hell, and purgatory were understood to be physical places until the 20th century. Because of death in this old model, we become cut off from the cosmos. For death separates us from time and space. God's space is envisioned separated from the universe, above or outside of the universe. End quote. That was a quote from a sermon given a couple years ago by Bob on the Day of the Dead. One of the few I gave him, because usually I would do Day of the Dead. This hierarchical concept of heaven, hell, and purgatory left us disconnected from our loved ones. This concept of heaven and hell as separate places where one is judged and sent left us with trepidation and fear. It really was not all that comforting. The church would celebrate All Saints' Day to remember and honor those who have gone before and assuredly entered into heaven. The day after was All Souls' Day, when we recall all who die in God's grace and friendship, but still imperfectly purified and are indeed assured of their eternal salvation, but after death, they undergo a purification period so as to achieve the holiness necessary to enter into the joy of heaven. The church gives the name purgatory to this final purification of the elect, which is entirely different from the punishment of the damned. Now, I did professional chaplaincy training at Children's Hospital in Los Angeles, and I do not care how Catholic a family may be. I was not about to use this bad theology to try and comfort a parent grieving over the loss of a child, and definitely not going to use this model to try to teach a child how to grieve over the loss of a parent. We would employ stories to help parents and children grieve, much like the water bug story I shared today, or the story of the fall of Freddie the Leaf, which was written by Leo Buscaglia. The most sense of bridging the gap with the dead is presence. Sometimes the presence is undifferentiated, a feeling of something there, but just often a sense of presence is quite specific. As in one's bereaved parents' report, I just knew that Jim was watching over me through all that. Memory is a special kind of presence. Often the living recall the words or the deeds of the dead as guidelines for present behavior. At other times, memory is reverie in which the time becomes more elastic so that past and present can merge. Living people also maintain contact with the dead through linking objects. Being near the objects evokes the dead sense of presence. The objects can be physical, for example, an article that belonged to the deceased, or non-material, such as a favorite song. And that's from Dead But Not Lost. Presence can appear or become real in the physical absence. Christ is present in the remembered ritual of breaking bread and sharing the cup, yet he is physically absent. He is simultaneously present and absent like our beloved dead. The simplest act can bring back a fond memory. Just writing this sermon has brought back so many of my friends, living and deceased, because as you recall someone, all surrounded that person as well. As I recall one who has passed, I also recall times we spent together with each other and lives we shared with others. So as we celebrate the Day of All Saints, All Souls, the Day of the Dead, how about if we share a couple of facts, mostly around Day of the Dead? It's not celebrated on the same day as Halloween. Contrary to what a lot of people seem to think, El Dia de los Muertos is traditionally celebrated on November 2nd. But it is part of a multi-day sequence of festivities that usually begin on the evening of October 31st collectively. The entire celebration is sometimes referred to as the Days of the Dead. The day before is dedicated to remembering dead children. El Dia de los Muertos is meant to honor the spirits of deceased adults on November 1st. However, families gather to remember the spirits of children who passed away prematurely. This is called either El Dia de los Inocentes, the Day of the Innocents, or El Dia de los Angelitos, the Day of the Little Angels. Interesting enough, the days of this tradition have been moved. You see, this tradition is really, really old. The Day of the Dead isn't just different from Halloween, it's also potentially much, much older. Historians can trace its origins back as far as 3,000 years to ancient Mesoamerica. These were festivals dedicated to the goddess of the underworld. These festivals were traditionally held in the ninth month of the Aztec calendar, which would mean it more around August, which also would make it right on the edge of harvest. However, in an attempt by the Spanish conquistadors to make it a Christian holiday, it was moved to the end of October and beginning of November to specifically coincide with All Saints and the All Hallowtide Triduum, which is a fancy word for 3 days. It's a day to celebrate. This is not a day to mourn. You ever notice how even the skeletons look like they're having a party on the Day of the Dead art? It's a far cry from how many Western cultures view death. But the Mexican culture takes this lightness very seriously due to the belief that the spirits who come to visit the world would be insulted. They would be insulted if they found everyone in mourning. So instead, the Day of the Dead is meant as a celebration of life. Family members get together to tell funny stories about the deceased relatives and remember how they lived, not feeling sorry for them. Altars to the dead have been forgotten. Probably the main component of the Day of the Dead is decorating the altar, or more accurately, putting out offerings or ofrendas. Contrary to what the term altar implies in the English language, these are not for worship. Instead, each family assembles one as a way of paying tribute to the dead, with every part of the altar symbolizing something related to either the holiday or the dead ancestor family member is dedicated to. This includes orange and yellow marigolds, incense, candles, pictures of the deceased, water, bread, favorite food, sometimes bottles of liquor, and other traditional Day of the Dead foods. Something specific sometimes to those who you're trying to remember. Favorite toys or treats of children, maybe a dress or a vest somebody wore. And the flowers are meant to attract the ghosts. The official flowers of the Day of the Dead are used in massive quantities to decorate the graves and the altars, a practice that has its roots in pre-Columbian tradition. The flower is nicknamed El Flor del Muerto, the flower of the dead. It sometimes is said to represent the sun and rebirth. They are also believed to help guide the spirits back home. Monarch butterflies are often viewed as returning ancestors. Every year during the week of November 2nd, parts of Mexico are swarmed with monarch butterflies that travel a staggering 3,000 miles, all the way from Canada. The belief that the spirits of the dead could return in the form of hummingbirds or butterflies goes back all the way to the Aztecs, so it's not hard to see why monarchs would become a key decorative motif. And failing to celebrate can be dangerous. If this all sounds like a lot of time and energy and money, well, just remember, not celebrating could be even more costly. According to some traditions, if the dead return home and find that their family has failed to build them a suitable altar, they sometimes get revenge. That can show up in many ways, including sickness and even death. So you better do it right, you better do it big, and do it proud. But unlike our memorial services, Day of the Dead isn't a one-time thing. Or All Saints' Day, which is just thought to be a special time of the year. Just when it's often thought of as a special time of year, the one night when the dead are allowed to return. The Day of the Dead isn't a special once-a-year event for spirits. According to traditional beliefs, the dead come and go all the time. And that's why in many Latin houses, you'll still see a small altar set up at all times. It won't be as elaborate as this, but it might be a little section on a nightstand or on a bookshelf or in an entryway. Entryway was most common, especially LA, you'll see it all over the place, but entryways are most common. That way the visitors can honor and recall those who have passed as they come into the house. The Day of the Dead is more like Christmas. It's meant to remind the living of things they should be trying to remember all year around. Remembering the deceased all year round is a good practice. As the time moves from one's death, and you move away from that death, the pain becomes softer, and the good memories become joyful and sweeter. Oftentimes we find ourselves laughing and loving as if the person was right here with us, and who knows? They just may be. With all this chatter of death and loss amid these Days of the Dead celebrations, I want to share with you two quotes. And the first one is from The Fall of Freddie the Leaf. My favorite quote from this book goes, Freddie the Leaf is just realizing that all the leaves are starting to drop off the tree, and he turns to the white old leaf and says, "Then what has been the reason for all of this?" Freddie continued to question, "Why are we here at all if we are only to have to fall and die?" Daniel answered in the matter-of-fact way that he always answered. It's about the sun and the moon. It's been about happy times together. It's been about the shade and the old people and the children. It's been about the colors in the fall. It's been about the seasons. Isn't that enough? And the last quote I want to share is from Garth Brooks. Looking back on the memory of the dance we shared beneath the stars above, for a moment, all the world was right. How could I have known you'd ever say goodbye? And now I'm glad I didn't know. I'm glad I didn't know the way it all would end, the way it all would go. Our lives are better left to chance. I could have missed the pain, but then I'd have to miss the dance. I hope we all get to remember joyfully how we shared lives with those who've gone before us, how we celebrated great moments, how we cried together in sad moments, and how sometimes we were just together in the everyday. And I hope we all get to remember how we enjoyed the dance. Amen.